expecting a 5 wheel today, but if the alarm does sound, please leave clearing through your nearest exit. There is one each one of the room there, or the doors that you came in through the back of the chamber. The meeting will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube following the meeting. Therefore, any members of the public present should be aware that they may be recorded even if they are not participating in the meeting. This causes any concern, can you please let either myself or Steph know so that we can see what we can do for you. Please mind if you switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. Just to do that as I was done. The planning applications will be heard in order as in the agenda. The chair will announce the agenda item number. The planning officer will introduce the application with any relevant updates, provide a visual presentation to aid members' understanding of the context of the application. I will then call upon public speakers to present in accordance with the public speaking arrangements. We will then have questions or points of clarification from the members and officers, and we will then answer any technical details to be clarified at the same time. The committee will then discuss and debate the application. We may then seek further clarification on any points that arise. Particular points from officers regarding the application or points raised by speakers may also be debated and discussed, and we will then formal vote on the application. So we start with agenda item 1. Apologies for absence there.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Martin Wale for hearing Councillor Lucy Trimnall as substituting, and an apology from Councillor Jenny Kenton. In that Chair.
Thank you very much. The minutes from the previous meeting are currently available, and we will bring them back to the next meeting for agreement signing. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest on anything that's on the agenda today? No. Okay. There are no registered speakers for public question time, so we will therefore move on to the first application, which is the land south of Kenton Mandeville, Somerton. And you're the officer for the presentation. Would you like to cover the chair?
You're seating along that back row there. Do you want to come through?
Thank you.
Okay, so this is application 22-01720 out land south of the B3153 Kingdom Mandeville. The application site lies west of Kingdom Mandeville and south of the B3153. It joins the village at the north east and south east corners of the site and comprises 3 fields in agricultural use. This is an aerial view of the application site. The application is in outline only, and consideration here only includes the proposed access and the principle of up to 100 new dwellings. All other matters are reserved. There have been some amendments since the committee report was published. The illustrative master plan has been slightly amended to align with the preliminary access arrangement plans, which are submitted for approval here. You can see on the left image, which is revision C, that form of the illustrative master plan has now been superseded, but it is in all of my slides because that's the one we had at the time. The conditions would be amended to show the illustrative master plan revision E. You can see that the footpath where I've put B has been left as is instead of moving around that proposed new dwelling. And you can see where the letter A is that there would be a chicane. The footpath would be slightly to the right of a merge separating the footpath and the access road. Therefore, all the conditions recommended in the report would be updated. In addition, a further condition has been recommended in response to last-minute objections, and that condition would be Any future reserve matters application will be supported by a design compliance statement setting out how they have taken account of the established principles within the design intent statement and the iterative master plan. In terms of consultations, 2 full public consultations have been undertaken for this application, and there have been no objections from any statutory consultees. There have been over 550 objections and 4 letters of support. The main issues subject of this presentation are the principle of the development, character and appearance, highway safety impacts and the planning balance. A full assessment of all the material considerations is set out in the published committee report. The site lies on the western edge of Kingston Mandeville and would provide up to 100 new dwellings, including 35% affordable housing. The loss of agricultural land is acceptable in this case. The site would comprise a rural settlement under local plan policy SS2. Paragraph 77 of the MPPF supports the delivery of new homes through extensions to existing villages. The site was identified in the HELA 2021. However, the HELA is afforded limited weight. The council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing sites. We now have a 2.11 year supply rather than 5 years. The annual housing shortfall in this area is 208. This proposal would contribute up to 100 to that shortfall. The annual affordable housing shortfall is 118 units, and this proposal would contribute up to 35 to that shortfall. This would therefore meet that particular criterion of policy SS2. In terms of the scale of growth, if this scheme were approved, the scale of growth would exceed that expected of a rural settlement. However, there is no set limit to scale of growth. Therefore, this would not alone be considered reasonable grounds for refusal. A high volume of objections has been received, therefore that criterion of SS2 is not met. In terms of locational sustainability in transport terms, given its rural location, it is considered relatively sustainable and acceptable in this regard. Amendments have been secured to overcome officer concerns regarding potential harm to character of the existing settlement and the surrounding landscape. The amendments comprise the reduction to 100 new dwellings from 120, which would result in a lower density and less built up scheme. The integration of green infrastructure throughout the residential zones, increased landscape buffers around the residential areas, increased public access to open space, including orchards, allotments, informal recreation and circular walks, and enhanced connectivity with the village and the existing footpath network. The existing public access open space on the site comprises 1.5%. This scheme would deliver 68% of the site as publicly accessible open space. Therefore, the previous officer concerns are considered to have been fully resolved. Objections have been received regarding landscape harm. The open countryside is considered to be of intrinsic character and beauty and is protected in the local plan and in the MPPF. The site is not a valued landscape and is described in the council's landscape assessment as quite mundane. Notwithstanding, the proposed development would not be overly prominent in medium or long views following mitigation measures comprising significant landscaping. That would be large landscape buffers at the site boundaries of 30 to 50 metres wide, the retention and enhancement of existing field boundaries, substantial tree planting throughout the residential zones and around the site, and as I've mentioned, 69% green infrastructure. The site comprises grass fields in private ownership crossed by public footpaths. The most affected receptors would be footpath users crossing the site. However, this impact would be transitory and short-lived and would be mitigated to acceptable levels by the proposed soft landscaping measures. The wider area is relatively flat, and these views show how the site would be visible in short, medium, and long views.
And there's a delay on this, it's not updated on the line. It's not presentation for. Sometimes it just takes a few seconds to catch up. You've got Can I start again?
So those are views, the legend is on the top right to show you from which viewpoints the site has been assessed. So the existing built form and boundary treatments limit views from the village. And the scale of the proposed dwellings is indicated within the submitted documents as a mix of detached, terraced and semi-detached properties, predominantly 2 stories, some 2.5 stories at key locations. However, the appearance of the proposed dwellings will be fully assessed at the reserve matter stage.
Sorry, Tara, I don't know what to suggest for this.
So I would just ask anyone if using the Wi-Fi in the room, if they just, unless you're actually really need, if you just knock the Wi-Fi off a second, so that we can try and keep the presentation and keep transmitting live, that hope to pick up a bit more. There you go. I think it's just the volume of people that
Yeah.
the phones and laptops that are picking up the Wi-Fi is just overwhelming.
So that was the slide I was talking about, showing the existing built form and boundary treatments which limit views from the village. I was talking about the scale of the proposed dwellings and that the appearance would Okay, given the indicative height of the proposed dwellings and the indicative landscaping scheme, the adverse impact to the visual amenity and character of the area would be
the hours, or they've just come back on the hours of
They're-
flashes.
they're
so I think we
fine.
may,
Yeah, they're fine.
So any adverse impact to the visual amenity and character of the area would be mitigated to an acceptable level. So in terms of the impact on the village itself, the amended layout would have approximately 69% green infrastructure. The reduced quantum and well-integrated green infrastructure would prevent a suburban estate character. The clusters of dwellings along the Spine Road would be similar to existing housing within Keinton Mandeville. The indicative layout would represent good design and accord with the NPPF and the Council's placemaking principles. The indicative landscaping and layout would be conditioned to inform the reserved matters applications. The proposal would infill a gap in the existing built envelope and would not extend further west or south. It would be well connected to the existing settlement at 2 points, which I've indicated with the red arrows. It would enhance existing connections between the northwest and southwest and south parts of Keinton Mandeville and would appear as a natural evolution of the village form or extent. The green open areas south of the B3153 dwellings would remain. The proposal would result in an acceptable new village edge and transition to open countryside. As I said, the indicative landscaping and layout would be conditioned to inform the reserved matters. In terms of highways, objections have been received concerned with increased traffic from the proposed new dwellings. The Highway Authority has no objections, subject to conditions and Section 106 agreement for a travel plan and highways improvement works. So the two plans on the right show the proposed footway at the northeast corner of the site, pedestrian crossings over the B3153 and Barton Road, linking the High Street footway to provide a continuous safe walking route into the village centre. I've mentioned already it is considered a sustainable location due to reasonable access to some local amenities and public transport options on foot, bearing in mind its rural context. Recent objections have been received regarding the evidence base used by the Highway Authority to assess this application. This evidence is provided by the Avon and Somerset Police Road Safety Team, who record personal injury collision data and not damage-only collision data. This is in line with the Department for Transport and is considered consistent and of a better quality than those of damage-only collisions and more reliable for undertaking road safety assessments and decision-making. Therefore, only 3 collisions noted are the personal injury collisions, which are included on our records. And the 2 green dots, on the bottom right of the map, which are over 2 miles from the site, do not evidence highways safety issues in this case. So given the reduction to 100 new dwellings, any highways impact arising from this scheme would be even less than what was assessed originally and which was found acceptable in terms of highway safety. I'm waiting for this slide to change.
There we go. Done. The internet's wired into this one.
Shall I carry on? Okay, so the scheme in terms of highways would provide good connectivity both within the site and to the existing settlement, where it would be connected to the existing settlement at 2 points. The existing public footpaths would be retained, enhanced, and further interconnected. There would be new public routes within land that is currently predominantly in private ownership. Therefore, there would be benefits for active travel, health, recreation, and community cohesion. MPPF paragraph 116. My screen.
Screen share again. That just disappeared. No, it's nearly there.
Okay, so MPPF paragraph 116 states that developments should only be refused on highways grounds if the impact on highway safety following mitigation is severe. In this case, there are no objections from the Highway Authority, and the proposal is policy compliant in terms of highway safety, subject to conditions and a Section 106 legal agreement. Coming to the planning balance, the tilted balance of MPPF paragraph 11D as it dated applies here, given the council's lack of a 5-year housing land supply. Therefore, permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. This is the amended MPPF, includes the red text, which is having particular regard to sustainable locations, making effective use of land, securing well-designed places, and providing affordable homes. This proposal would provide a number of benefits. So the sustainable location is considered a benefit. The contribution of 100 new dwellings and 35 new affordable housing units are both significant positive, afforded significant positive weight in the planning balance. There would be an efficient use of land, highways improvements, potential additional parking for the existing village hall, which is considered a community facility, enhanced public rights of way, connections at the northwest and southwest of the village, improving connectivity between those existing communities and the new communities, and a more cohesive settlement. New circular walks within the site, and new public access to open space on land that is currently private, representing, as I've mentioned before, around 68% of the site. And the land which is currently publicly accessible in the site is 1.5%. There would be over 4 hectares of informal open space to mitigate the King Western Meadows Chipwesai, which is nearly 7 times that required. There would be a sustainable drainage scheme to mitigate phosphates, which would result in betterment, not just neutrality. There would be an on-site, locally equipped area of play and a well-integrated green infrastructure, which, as I mentioned, represents good design and adheres to the council's placemaking principles. The biodiversity net gains would result in over 10%, which is also considered a significant positive, given that this application precedes the mandatory 10% BNG requirement. So they are not required to deliver 10% net gains. There would also be economic benefits of increased footfall, employment opportunities, SIL and developer contributions. It is recognised that the parish councils, the Environment Group, CPRE have upheld their objections despite the amendments, and 555 objections have been received. However, no objections have been received from any statutory consultee. Overall, the benefits are afforded great positive weight, while the partial conflict with local plan policy SS2 is afforded negligible negative weight. Therefore, it is the officer's view that the benefits arising from this scheme would outweigh any adverse impacts. For these reasons, there are no adverse impacts that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. The proposal is considered to comprise sustainable development, and the recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Catherine. As we move to public speakers, and I will start with Fletcher Robinson. If you'd like to come to the microphone there, you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. CPRE Somerset's view is that Kenton Mandeville is an inappropriate location for an urban extension. Policy SS2 requires that development in rural settlements should be commensurate with the scale of the settlement. The officer's report says, quote, if this proposal were to be approved, the scale of growth in Kenton Mandeville cumulatively would be commensurate with that of the higher rural centres. That's a reason for refusal, not approval. Kenton Mandeville isn't a rural centre, it's a rural settlement. The rural centres are Bruton, Ilchester, Martog, Milbourne Port and Stoke-Southampton. Turning a village into a town without the facilities of a town is the opposite of good planning. Approving this would drive a coach and horses through the local plan and its settlement hierarchy. Such drastic action can't be justified by the national increase in housing targets. The government is saying support your local plan, not ditch your local plan. But the landscape officer has done a complete U-turn. Back in April, she said this is, quote, a typical urban extension inappropriate to the village and contrary to policy EQ2. Now she says that reducing the scheme from 120 houses to 100 houses has changed her mind. How? It's still a massive, large block of development covering the same area with buildings and screening extending deep into the open countryside, blocking locally valued panoramic views to the west from 2 village footpaths. The landscape officer indicates in her post yesterday that the recent removal of 20 houses, or 17% of the total, results in a 100% increase in green space. Our architect trustee says that just doesn't add up, as the average size of the houses is unchanged. And the historic settlement pattern in Kenton Mandeville is linear along the lanes, not huge blocks of backland development. The only backland development in Kenton because it's a disused quarry. The landscape officer referred yesterday to Coombe Lane on the south side of the village, but in fact there's no backland development on Coombe Lane. The landscape officer described the applicant's LBIEA as impressive, but it's been called a fundamental misunderstanding of the assessment process by Carly Tinkler, one of the most senior landscape consultants in the country. She serves on the Landscape Institute's Best Practice Committee and drafts the guidelines for landscape assessment. Have members read her devastating 10-page report on this planning application? She explains how the applicant has undervalued the landscape by omitting key factors, how the point system has been fixed to produce assessments of moderate impacts rather than high impacts, how the alleged benefits of the scheme have been double counted, and how this development will cause, quote, substantial harm to the character and appearance of Kenton Mandeville.
Thank you. Can I please call our second speaker, Peter Leather? Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. I speak on behalf of 500 plus residents of Kenton Mandeville who very strongly oppose this application. The high adverse impacts of this development significantly and demonstrably outweigh the limited benefits. Even with the tilted balance engaged, national and local protection policies continue to apply to your decision taking. The proposal is 100% contrary to local plan policies SS2, EQ2 and EQ5. The proposal is contrary to the 2021 HELAT assessment, which concluded that 3 of the 4 blocks comprising this development were unsuitable, being too remote. Scale: 100 new homes in Kenton Mandeville, a small rural settlement, is excessive, disproportionate growth. It amounts to a huge 20% increase, consistent with a Tier 4 rural centre, not a small Tier 5 rural settlement. Character: linear form, appearance. It creates a stark urban-style block in open countryside with a sprawled urban edge. That is suburban character of urbanising form that is not characteristic. It does not reflect, respect, nor integrate with Kenton Mandeville's historic linear settlement pattern. It harms South Somerset's distinctive landscape. It creates a very high adverse visual impact. Panoramic countryside views would be lost forever. Councillors, I do ask you to refer to the aerial photographic image, which I submitted in support of my notes a few days ago. It shows the Threefield site. It shows the visual enormity of what a development there would mean. Amenity: it would result in unacceptably high levels of adverse effects on amenity due to increased noise, disturbance, lighting, clutter, erosion and pollution. Landscape consultant Carly Tinkler's statement last week confirms the reduction from 120 to 100 houses and related offsets do not reduce the high levels of adverse visual effects. The development still occupies the whole of the site and will permanently change its character from rural to urban. The proposed landscaping remedies are expressed to be illustrative and indicative only. Those plans cannot be guaranteed. Those plans are not binding and cannot be made the subject of a condition.
Thank you, Mr. Hamlet.
Thank you, councillors. Please reject this application.
Well, thank you, Mr. Leather. My next speaker is Mr. Hamlet. Again, you have 3 minutes.
You should have all seen Outlook these items, so if you'd like to pass them around, I'll be most grateful because I've been told I can't display them.
And I believe that members have already received them.
Okay, if you've already received them, that's fine. Thank you very much. Traffic, highways, pedestrian access. Context: there are almost 550 developments to this development, more than one for every household in Kenton Mandeville. Over 300 of these objections cite traffic, highways, pedestrian as an issue. Significant weight to refuse permission. Avon and Somerset Police data for the period 2018 to 2024 show that there have been 260 speeding offences and 95 traffic incidents in Kenton Mandeville Parish. The highways data presented to the planning officer do not take account of this and contains material errors. Please ask the planning officer. It has taken over a year for highways to concede that there was a severe accident at the proposed site for pedestrian access. Evidence is on the website. Significant doubt in data used. The proposed pedestrian access is unsafe. Significant danger to pedestrians. Again, that is in this pack. Policy: the proposed development does not meet policy SS2, is not consistent with community-led plans or supported by the local community neighbourhood plan. Supports this. It is contrary to MPPF paras 109C, 110, 115D, 116. As an example, increase in traffic which would pass through the village centre Queen Street and Common Lane to access the A37 and A303. This is SatNav recommended route, deemed unacceptable by SSDC HELA assessment. Summarising the Moss Naylor Young report, a worsening of the existing situation would have a severe impact. Safety. On the slides, you will have seen that the safety access and the photographs that I've given show that it is unsafe for pedestrians. A recent severe accident, which I alluded to, is at that junction. Do you think that's safe? I don't think so. Conclusion. There is significant weight of public opinion to refuse permission, significant doubt in highways data, significant danger to pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please invite Hugh Van Bergen? Thank you very much. My apologies.
Sorry.
That's
Sorry.
okay. My apologies. You have 3 minutes.
This proposal will do demonstrable and permanent harm to our school that cannot be mitigated by a Section 106 agreement. Our primary school already has 155 children in a school with a maximum capacity of 147. So it's already more than full, and its main buildings are already way too small per the DFE's criteria. This development would yield an extra 32 primary age children on top of the extra 20 from other developments in the pipeline. So that's an increase of 52 pupils, or 33%. Now, without even bothering to consult the school, Somerset Education Authority have said that an extra modular classroom can be installed, funded by Section 106 money. No problem. Well, unfortunately, this will not work. There's not actually enough space for another classroom, and the rest of the buildings and facilities are still way too small. To meet the DFE standards, the school would have to be would need a major rebuild and would probably have to buy more land. Now, despite being warned repeatedly about this problem, your planning officers have simply accepted the Section 106 contribution spewed out by the DFE's algorithm. At no point did they inquire further about the problem. For them, it was just a box-ticking exercise, not a professional judgment. So they proposed a Section 106 contribution that's way too small to do the required building work. And now they cannot realistically negotiate a much higher figure without sacrificing affordable homes. Because it cannot be solved, therefore, by a Section 106 agreement, this overcrowding will do demonstrable and permanent harm to the school and is clearly not sustainable. Now, the sewage system in the village is already stretched to bursting point, quite literally. Even after remedial work, we still have raw sewage flowing down the streets during periods of heavy rain. There is therefore clear evidence that the sewage infrastructure cannot cope with the existing needs of the development of the village, let alone the additional load from this large development. So what I would say is that any confirmation given by Wessex Water about the ability of the sewage system to cope is utterly meaningless. So that really means that it clearly fails the requirements of paragraph 98D of the NPPF, that local services should be able to develop and modernise in line with development. This, again, risks demonstrable harm to the village and is clearly not sustainable. These are just two of the many reasons why the committee must exercise its own professional judgment and reject this application.
Thank you very much. Could I now invite Mr. Cook? Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. You have 3 minutes.
Councillors, we say there is no presumption in favour of this development, and we say the report applies the wrong concept of sustainability. None of its components are met, and there is no tilted balance. You might wonder how the planning officer could describe this development as relatively sustainable. Well, I think you can establish that if you look at the evidence used in the report. It uses a walking pace of 5 miles an hour to time distances to the village. 3 miles an hour is the accepted standard for a healthy adult. Even speed walkers would take nearly half an hour to reach the only cafe in the village via a lane with no footways and a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit. And don't forget your wellies to negotiate the sewage in common lane. The report also rewrites the Heller assessments. They concluded it was too remote to be developed. The report uses divorced instead of remote. And then it marries up the site back to the village with footpaths which have existed for decades, not centuries. That doesn't move the site any nearer the village. The report also concludes that Kenton has reasonably good transport options. We know better, a car is essential. That's why the village car scheme was encouraged by Somerset Council. There's not even any public transport to our nearest market town, Somerton. The truth is, Kenton has no amenities, virtually no amenities, no employment, and meagre public transport. So let me turn to the planning balance, the second issue for your judgment, not the judgment of Somerset officers. This is essentially a balance between the survival of rural settlement and 35 affordable homes. The report has a benefit table with 19 entries. Out of the 19, 5 are negatives, most of them significant. 8 are not benefits at all. They mitigate an urban eyesore. 5 are minor positives and uncertain. The affordable homes probably won't get built, and the landscaping layout cannot be guaranteed. And one of them, it can't be achieved, the remedy the school needs. Our judgment on this is rooted in village consultation, in cogent evidence, in expert advice, and the experience we all have of living in Kenton. Even the report labels 2 benefits as neutral. Surely a benefit must be positive to be a benefit. What weight does a neutral benefit have in the balance? Will negative benefits appear next? And what about entry number 10? This is based on supporting comments written by the planning officer herself, since retracted. So that benefit needs to be retracted too. I urge you to reflect on all our comments and conclude that the adverse impacts of this urban style development in a rural setting significantly and demonstrably outweigh the listed benefits.
Thank you very much.
Please don't
Thank you.
sacrifice Kenton Manor.
Thank you very much.
The rural
Thank
settlement.
you very much. Thank
jewels
you.
in Somerset Crown.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Okay. I'm just going to check. Is there anything that, Catherine, that you wish to comment at this point, or anything you wish to clarify, or are you happy that we go straight into questions?
Have we missed somebody?
No?
Parish council.
Right, next page.
My apologies. I've got a gap at the bottom, and then I'm on to the next page. Ryder, who is the parish councillor for Kenton Manor.
Thank you. At least I'm worth more than a gap. The role of the parish council is to represent the best interests of the residents. With over 550 objections to this proposal from a village of just over 500 households, you can't ignore that. The parish council, we question some of the potential benefits of this development listed by the planning officer. We question whether they're indeed beneficial. To name a few, there may be provisional of affordable housing, but it is actually far in excess of a proven need, which I will refer to later. Additional parking for the village hall, which is not required by the village hall trustees and has been identified as a potential crime risk by Avon and Somerset Police. The strange assertion that somehow an increase of 100 homes will reduce reliance on the private car. And therefore, in a village with no viable alternatives to the car, there's no public transport. The planning officer and landscape consultant between them refer repeatedly to Kenton as a nucleated settlement, and the applicant's design statement states that the proposed layout is based on Barton St David, which we admit is a nucleated settlement. The map evidence, which I hope you've had a chance to read beforehand, shows that Kenton is actually a linear settlement, and an urbanised development will seriously compromise that existing character. The parish council has an independent traffic report. Hopefully you have a copy of that report. Highways have so far produced no hard data to refute it because they have not undertaken detailed survey work of their own. This report clearly states that large developments will cause severe harm as defined in the NPPF. Since 2016, 108 homes have been built or given planning approval in Kent. An additional 100 would represent overdevelopment, a legally established principle. In the judicial review brought by Norton St Philip PC against Mendip Council, it was ruled a legitimate reason to reject a development if a community had already been overburdened, even in the face of a lack of a 5-year housing land supply. Our housing need in Kenton has been quantified. We have a recent housing needs assessment, I hope again you have a copy of that, conducted by the Community Council for Somerset. In that, a stated demand for 20 affordable homes spread over a period of 10 years, not 35 in a single hit. In summary, the proposal is totally out of character with the existing linear form of the village. The proposal would significantly increase traffic in an already over-congested village centre. The plan for pedestrian access to the site is actually dangerous. There is no local need for this housing, and if built, it will cause significant harm to the village infrastructure.
Thank you very
The
much.
principle of overdevelopment apply.
Thank you. I'm going to call Alex Bullock, who is the agent. Thank you.
Members, thank you for this opportunity to speak at committee this afternoon. My name is Alex Bullock and I'm the planning partner at LVA. We've heard from a number of residents who have expressed genuine concerns. Those concerns are not shared by the technical work submitted with this application, by statutory consultancies, nor your paid planning professional in the comprehensive planning report before you. As you've heard from your officer, this isn't another ordinary edge of settlement application. Whilst it does propose residential development, it does so with the provision of in excess of 60% open space, which seeks to restore locally lost landscape features as part of a comprehensive approach. Such a commitment can be appropriately secured and a genuine feature at RM stage. Whilst my view on this application differs from many in attendance, we do, however, share some things in common. I, like the majority of people in this room, many of whom are rejecting, sit in the very fortunate position of being a homeowner. I, like many in this room, have both children and grandchildren who will in years to come aspire, like I did, to own their own home. I, like many in this room, live in a house that was built on land that was previously on the edge of a settlement and probably a green field. I, like many in this room, happen to be fortunate position of going home every night to a safe, suitable and appropriate accommodation for my family's needs. Where we differ is in our views as to whether more housing is needed and how we reach housing numbers that are required. We can sit here and pretend that we don't need change or that change is needed, but just not in the community that I live. Such a view is wrong in our opinion, not least because South Somerset area needs to supply annually a figure close to double what it had to plan for over a year ago and was failing to achieve sufficient supply then, and a figure now some 400 more dwellings per annum than the adopted plan and the associated strategy requires. This is the challenge that faces you councillors, and to hit those requirements will result in difficult choices made in the face of opposition. The context for those choices is that as of March 2024, there were some 9,582 households looking for a new home registered with the council on the Social Housing Service Home Finder Somerset. We can sit here and pretend these aren't real people, real families with children who simply cannot afford to rent or buy a property, or that this is a problem for elsewhere. I say this is a very real problem for Somerset. We can pretend that we don't need more affordable housing in rural areas. Yet research by the National Housing Federation in 2024 showed that in rural areas, only 9% of homes are classified as affordable, with the average rural home costing in excess of 400,000, with the affordability gap insurmountable for many, with house prices 23 times of average earnings. We can pretend this isn't an issue in rural Somerset. The Parish Council's own evidence shows a minimum parish affordable need of 21 families. We believe the actual need is higher and will, as we have seen elsewhere, only increase over time. As a minimum, the application before you has the ability to resolve this local affordable need in full. We therefore believe there is a clear and demonstrable benefits that this scheme, unlike others, can deliver, which should allow you to follow the strong officer recommendation before you and grant outline planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Catherine, is there anything you wish to clarify at this point?
Well, only really that the indicative plans and the design intent statement would be covered by conditions, and the healer did say, I mean, there's a slide on it and it's covered in the report, that the reason some of those fields were initially considered unsuitable is because they were divorced from the settlement by the fact of amalgamating them into one site gives them access from the top and the bottom of the site, and therefore it overcomes the issues that are set out in the healer, which is published on the council's website. And then lastly, the locational sustainability. The planning inspectorate does take into account the fact that it is in a location, a site might be in a rural area, and that's why the balance is about relative sustainability, because clearly the council's strategic settlement policies look at whether there are any local amenities accessible by foot. So that's really what the locational sustainability issue is about.
Thank you very much. Let's start with questions. Councillor Curley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A few technical questions. The first one may have been me not understanding something on one of the slides. Unfortunately, did say that we've gone down to 2.11 years on our land supply, which is a bit of a disappointment. But I noticed underneath that, it said the shortfall for South Somerset is listed as 208, of which this would give 100 houses towards. Now that doesn't seem right to me, that we could have a shortfall of 208 if our housing land supply. Is that just something I've misinterpreted on one of the first slides?
we're working on with some of the IT stuff, but I have to take my hat off to the guys at Theatre. They're always really good at supporting us. So it's not their fault. So please don't criticise them.
I think we should be ready now, Chair.
Yeah, I've got the answer to the number crunching. So it's in the report under identified housing need, excluding affordable housing. So the need, the annual need in South Somerset, as set out in the 5-year housing land supply paper, is 669 per year, and the annual shortfall is 208.
Okay, thank you very much.
The education question, education is a statutory consultee, and we take on board what they advise us. In terms of the access, there is already a pedestrian access at the north east corner of the site, which is the public right of way, and that access would be retained. Then obviously you've got your footway improvements that are on highways land.
I just come back, Chair. I think there is an issue. I mean, if I could just go up and show you on the map very quickly.
Just here. Right. This way. I won't be able to see you.
So just here, we've got access coming up along here. This little bit of land here, I believe, although it's pulled back, the ownership is still private. So we're going to come up to here, and there's no access, public access across this frontage. I just don't think that's been considered.
So is the question whose ownership is that piece of land in?
Yeah, well, yeah.
So can I just check? Is it a planning? Is it, you don't need to own the land to gain planning permission over it. Am I correct on that?
That's right.
So it would be up to the developers. I'm guessing if they're saying that's what they're going to deliver, it would be up to them to obtain that, deliver it.
So if they couldn't obtain that, then it would affect the sustainability and it couldn't be built out. Would that be correct?
If they couldn't deliver it, they couldn't. If they couldn't deliver the footway improvements, they wouldn't be able to deliver any of it, because it would all be pre-commencement conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously a very detailed report from the planning officer, but it does contain an awful lot of contradictions, and also to heard errors sometimes in facts, maybe conclusions. Just one thing, this report is nearly 100 pages. It really would have been helpful if they'd all been numbered. I've done that on my own report. And if you turn to page, what I call 42, which in the left-hand side column has 1.69. This is quoting from yourself, planning officer. It is the officer's view that this scheme would conflict with policy SS2, since the addition of nearly a quarter more homes would not be commensurate with the scale of the village, as such a degree of harm to the character of Kenton Mandeville will be considered to result from the proposal. Now, I know you later try and get over that, but that is a pretty damning statement on the whole application. That's the first point. Later, when I number page 45, in the left-hand margin, 12.55, you refer to policy EQ2 of the local plan, which requires high quality design, which promotes South Somerset's local distinctiveness and preserves or enhances the character and appearance of the district. Yet we've seen in the report and from what people have said, that this does nothing of the cause to support this. This is essentially an urban development parachuted down onto the edge of a small village. It's an urban development that really is more suited to something like Swindon than South Somerset. The next point is on what I call page 80.
Councillor Page, can I just let the officer answer those two? I'm a bit concerned that we'll lose track of the other.
Okay, so the aim of the report is to fully assess the scheme against local and national planning policy, and it is a balancing act. We're looking for harms, and we're looking for whether any of these adverse impacts can be rendered acceptable by mitigation or amendments, or whether they cannot be resolved in any way and therefore could become a reason for refusal. So, in my view, there is a degree of harm to the character of Kington Mandeville resulting from the conflict with one criterion of policy SS2, but the later assessments go through in great detail how the proposal or the amended scheme would interact with the existing landscape, the wider landscape setting, the existing settlement, and the transition between the two. And after that analysis, my view is that the harm would not be, or the adverse impact, when I say a degree of harm, as a degree of negativity, would not be a reason for refusal, because yes, a greenfield site would become a residential development. So clearly there is a change, but the change is not considered to result in unacceptable harm. And that's what the planning balance is trying to explain. The urban development that the wording was parachuted in, I wanted to try and go back to the slide that shows the difference between the originally proposed scheme, which is one in the middle, and the amended scheme, which is the one on the right. And the originally proposed scheme was a whole load of suburbanizing residential development with a bit of a landscaping buffer to hide it. But the amended scheme is a landscape-led scheme by a completely different team of designers from the original application. And it has landscaping at its heart, and the green infrastructure is integrated within all of the proposed residential areas. It's not just a suburban estate plonked into the countryside and hidden by trees. So it is specifically responsive to its environment.
Thank you for that response. Again, obviously people have different opinions. And I really do challenge this idea that it's anything but a sort of an urban development. If you look at its site, its location. I mean, you talked earlier about this being an extension to the village, an infill, an enhancement. It's nothing of the sort. It's on green agricultural land. It's not
Can we stick to questions?
Okay. The third question, which just follows up from my colleague really about the primary school, and this is something that's of concern to me with an educational background, that it's very worrying that you have not investigated this further, that as we've heard, that primary school is full. It doesn't actually have the physical space to actually add an extra classroom. It's an impossibility. So you've got potentially 50 children who are not going to have a place at their local primary school. So much for community, because if anything in a village is like
question.
school. So could I ask you again, why didn't you probe that? Why haven't you done a more detailed report on the schooling, given this has been raised? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So our specialist advisors of Somerset Council Educational Authority are specialists and advise the planning officer. Consultation, they do a very detailed assessment, they look at projections, and that is the advice we have from the specialist.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Page, do you have any further questions?
Not at this point, but it's,
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Osborne.
I think I've nicked your microphone. Thank you very much. What I was trying to say on the last slide was, I wasn't sure whether the slides you were speaking to corresponded with the correct ones, because I thought you were speaking or addressing matters that related to the very first slide you showed us, which was revision C and revision E, whereas the slide you had up was of the big plan on that side, and then a more detailed breakdown of what the blocks look like. So I was just slightly not clear as to whether your comments tallied up with those slides, that's all. And that what you're referring to was the change from revised drawing C to a revised drawing E. A couple of questions for you. The first one is really, why did the landscape officer actually change her mind to go from very strong objection to then supporting it? What convinced her that the mitigations would be sufficiently adequate to address it? Because there's also a school of thought that if you have to go in for extensive mitigations to a development, you shouldn't be approving it in the first place if it needs to be conditioned to the eyeballs to make it vaguely acceptable. So I'm curious to know why she changed her mind, because I don't think that really comes over. I'd like to know more about that, please. That's my first question.
Okay, we can take them one at a time.
Okay.
I will pass over to Andrew in a second as the landscape specialist, but just to make it clear that the objections were to the first scheme. The objections were to the first scheme, which is the indicative site layout in the middle of the slide here. The landscape officer and myself worked very closely with the applicants to completely redesign the scheme in order to overcome our objections. So I'll hand over now.
Hello, so I'm the landscape officer, and I reviewed the first scheme which was submitted, which is the scheme in the middle of the slide. And if you see the approach, the design approach that's been taken is essentially to access the site by a road, fill the fields with houses, and then to put a block of planting on the western side to hide the volume of housing that's there. What this meant in terms of the current access to the countryside in the public right of way, which runs down the eastern side of the site, is that people would lose their access to the countryside, and they would be walking through a suburban housing estate. So these points were all raised with the developer, and subsequently we looked at the historic landscape orchards and took a different design approach, which was to look at the landscape first and put in a landscape infrastructure into which walking routes would be put in, and different types of landscapes, so the orchards, the wildflower meadows, woodland, and increasing public rights of way, so that the visibility loss from the existing public rights of way is reduced considerably. People aren't walking next to housing estates, plus access to the countryside is increased by new footpaths which run along the western side of the site, so that people will have new access to the countryside and new views out to the countryside. So the scheme which was initially assessed was very different in terms of the harms to the new scheme, which I think, as Catherine's pointed out, provides people with 68% access to public open space and new access to the countryside. Plus, in terms of integrating the footpaths with the existing village, there are greater footpath accesses and networks. So it was felt that the initial scheme was perhaps kind of like a gated housing estate, whereas the new scheme provided integration and a lot more landscape benefits than the original scheme. That's why, in terms of the overall balance, I changed my view.
And what would your response be to the assessment, which I think most of us saw? Probably over the weekend, from Carly Tinkler, where I think she would dispute what you are saying.
So I didn't actually disagree with a lot of what she said, but I felt that the second scheme overcame a lot of the impacts that the design solutions to the first scheme didn't provide. For example, the visual impacts from the public right of way. Those are high sensitivity receptors in terms of visual assessment language, and that's what I was talking about. They have been mitigated in this scheme, and enhancements have been provided by providing new footpaths which also provide access to the countryside. So that's.
Can you just go back, because I'll be slightly thick here, but can you go back to the original slide you showed, which was revision C and revision E? Because you put those up to tally up with amending the documents. You could do that.
Yeah, so just to point out, I just wanted to draw your attention to this slide. The orange dotted line shows all the new public circular walks. The grey dotted line is the existing public right of way. The slight amendments to the illustrative master plan only relate to the public right of way at the north-east of the site, which would be retained as it is instead of being diverted around that proposed new dwelling. And the only other change is that letter A, where the number 1 is, where the road would be slightly angled to the west with a chicane. There's no other change between the illustrative master plan that is set out in the slides or online.
Jane, thank you for that. My second question, and I think it's probably a matter of opinion as to whether you feel it's sufficient mitigation or not. That is an area that is subjective. There isn't actually any absolution on that. Whatever else, you're still walking through a housing estate, whether there's planting there or not, and it will take quite a considerable amount of time for that planting to actually grow and develop, assuming that it's managed to do that. My second question just relates to the viability assessment. Has this been redone since the proposed drop in housing from 120 to 100? Has a viability assessment been done as to whether the 35% affordable housing, particularly with the ratio of at least 80% social housing, that is still going to be provided, because that is one of the planks of your arguments as to why this is a benefit. And as I can't see, maybe I missed it, a viability assessment in there to prove that they can deliver all of those goodies still at 100 Handley. I think that would have been useful to see, because we've all seen cases here where developers come back and say, we're awfully sorry, we can't afford this, so you're not going to get it.
Yeah, we only ask for a viability report from an applicant if they are saying they can't afford to pay anything that we've asked them to pay for, such as developer contributions, or, as you said, to provide 35% affordable housing or whatever it is. In this case, the developer is agreeing to provide all of it, and therefore they've not required to evidence viability in justifying their position with us. So that's why there's not needed to be a viability report from the applicants. All of the benefits which are put forward within the proposed scheme would be tied down to conditions and Section 106 agreements, so that there wouldn't be a situation in which this scheme could go ahead without the 10% biodiversity net gains, the 35% affordable housing, etc.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. So I have 4 questions, but they shouldn't be too long. So firstly, on page 22, we've got calculations for now, I was going to ask how on earth you got to those numbers, but I'm not going to ask that. All I want to know is, am I reading it correctly that it seems to suggest that the phosphate after occupation of these houses will be less than the phosphates now on what is claimed to be grassland at the moment, although Google Maps is actually a field of crops of some sort. So that's my first question. I don't know if you want me to go one at a time.
So the evidence submitted in terms of the phosphate betterment, which is correct what you just said, it would be a betterment. That's been fully assessed by the council's ecology and phosphates team and Natural England, and they're satisfied with the results of what's been put forward, and it would be conditioned.
Thank you. I mean, I do find it baffling if we're talking about anything between 60%, someone said, and nearly 70% of it still being, open sort of land, plus gardens and things. I'm just wondering how that grass is different from the grass that's there now, but that's fine. I'm not going to argue it. I wanted to know, could you detail the proposal to make improvements to the high street? Because it's already awful to drive up and down. It's a through route. It's incredibly congested. So what are your plans for that? Because it mentions it, but I couldn't find the detail I was looking for.
So planning applications, proposed development are not required to resolve existing problems. They are required to not exacerbate them. And for example, if it was felt by the highways team, or I should say STS, not felt, that a scheme wouldn't be feasible without such improvements, and those improvements would need to be made. So in this case, there would be a crossing, there would be 2 pedestrian crossings at that junction to link into the footpath network that's existing within the settlement. There would be conditions and a Section 106 agreement for the travel plan, and those are the proposed highways improvements as you see in those 2 images. I can defer you to Adam Garland, who's our highways officer, for further detail.
Thank you. So effectively, the improvements are only if the site is built. Otherwise, there's nothing being done to anything that's already there. So my last question, if I put them together, because they fit together. So the indicative scheme that we were shown just now, is this being decided and set in stone now, or could it be changed at reserved matters? That's the first part. And then the second one, it seems as though the new scheme prioritises public open space over the private garden space. And I just wondered whether the gardens are proposed to be adequate for families' needs. You've got drying, washing, storage of your equipment, safe play space for children and animals. So are they losing out massively on garden space?
When it comes to the reserve matters application, the future occupiers' residential amenity will be fully assessed in terms of internal space provision as well as external space provision. So there are no local or national technical standards for outside amenity space. Some councils have it, our local plan doesn't, I don't think, but an assessment would be made at that stage. And looking at the indicative plans, there's no reason to assume that adequate outdoor and indoor amenity can't be provided. So as it is, it would be an indicative master plan that would be conditioned at this stage. So it's about the design intention. So the intention to have the 69% public open space, all of that level of integrated green infrastructure, all of the planting, but the actual details would be submitted under the reserve matters.
Thank you, Councillor Seaman.
Thank you. You'll appreciate that in our placemaking principles, the council has been crystal clear on walking to primary schools to make it safe, convenient. I'm curious about the apparent routing out of the southeastern corner of the site. It seems to me that we've got a path which takes a very strange long way around, in that it seems to reach out for the existing public right of way rather than towards the school. I thought the demand line is probably to the south of where it is. And I also note that the red line on the application includes a lot of land that's not on the master plan that a sensible route for the footway to the school would follow. But I'm also still unclear as to what the improvements are in surfacing that will be available to enable that to be an all-weather, all year-round route to school that allows primary children, who will typically be a fairly broad pedestrian unit, parents, child being held, child in buggy being quite a lot of path space. So it's going to be a fairly major route that's needed. Additionally, you've got issues of avoiding conflict between groups, allowing a pedestrian coming the other way to avoid the group going down the park. So I'm a little surprised I'm not seeing clarity on the diagram. Could you please take me through the provisions that are being made?
I think that level of detail will be assessed at the reserve matter stage. So the intention at this point is to retain and enhance the existing public rights of way. We talked about the I don't know which is the best slide to show you. The dog leg on the bottom south east corner of the site leads on to Crystals. Is it called Crystals Lane? I've forgotten. Chisels Lane, yeah. So at that stage, at the reserve matter stage, all of that would be fleshed out, but there are conditions to recommended, which I can find if you need to know at this point.
Chairman, I've been through the conditions. I'm not convinced that I'm seeing enough to make sure that we have all-weather access, and indeed, given the lighting controls and sensitivity of the area, I think it's awkward to provide. So it really is something that I would expect to be clearly covered in either conditions or informatives, that this was an area of interest to the council. It's clearly part of our placemaking and is rather critical in this instance, because the very last thing we need is to start generating traffic from the site that's actually mum taking the kid 2 miles to do a 100-yard trip.
Yeah, I think the detail that the question is focusing on is would be assessed at the reserve matter stage. So there are conditions recommended and informatives regarding the public rights of way.
Okay.
So are we locked into the master plan, because the master plan shows a very strange route?
It's indicative. It's not an approved lockdown plan.
Councillor Power.
To be fair, Chair, I think mine's probably better for the debate. I just thought it through. It's probably best for the debate.
Thank you very much. With the questions being covered, I'm happy to move us into the debate, and as yours falls into that bit, do you want to kick us off, Councillor?
Thanks, Chair. Just going on about the highways part of this application, and you spoke about a crossing that's been put in. I've just got some concerns because I've had applications within my division that were promised crossings that still haven't been put in. The applications have been there for a number of years, about 8 to 10 years. They haven't had the crossings that they were promised put in. So I just wonder if we can put a condition, if, for example, down the line of the debate, it does go forward, can we put a condition for a crossing to definitely be put in place? Before occupation, yeah.
Adam, is that something you want to cover from a highways point of view?
Afternoon all. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me. I'm recovering from a strange virus thing. My voice is not good. But all your highway improvements and things like your active travel links, Councillor Steve mentioned the one at Southern End School, all of those things can be wrapped up in the 106 agreement with a trigger to say this shall be provided prior to first occupation. We've tried the prior to commencement, but developers tend to push back on that. So that 106 will include the access junction onto the High Street, the pedestrian link along High Street into the existing structure, the crossings on Barton Road, and, as I said, the other active travel links onto the public rights of way network in the area. But yes, they can be secured via that 106.
Thank you, Adam. Who would like to go next?
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, looking at this, there's quite clearly overwhelming objections from the community. I think if we were at any other position, we had a 5-year land supply, this would be a no-brainer. I don't think we'd be looking at this. However, we are where we are. 2.11 year land supply tilts the balance quite severely. I've been looking through this, looking for some material objections, and I am still concerned. I don't feel that my concerns about the materiality of the issues of the school have been addressed. Question for officers really is, if we were to refuse this on the basis of the impact on the school and it not being deliverable, how defendable would that be at an appeal? Thank you, Chair.
My view, I've seen in other appeals in other councils where the councils ignored the advice of their own educational authority and have had costs that have appealed. If an educational authority is saying this is what will be achieved, they scrutinise these things in detail and manage school places. In my
back off of your laptop a bit.
That's not on.
Okay.
We're okay now. So ideally, everyone would go to their local school and walk there. But as we know, people go to other schools. I'm not saying that that's what the educational authority has in mind. We don't know what they had in mind. I've had a quick look online, and I can see there is space at the school, but we don't have a drawing of a building that might go in there, so we don't know. That's conjecture. The evidence we have before us is that our educational authority said that they have a management plan that would accommodate, with the £1.2 million, would accommodate school children across the whole school. And I don't think we can question that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that we shouldn't be ignoring officers. But what happens when we think that the officers may well have ignored the school?
Yes.
Okay.
So can I add quickly, members of the public, we have listened to what you've got to say. We need to give our officers the opportunity to do the same.
So I'm not necessarily saying it's the ideal scenario. I don't know that the children may go to another school elsewhere, and it happens. I live in Devon. Children actually choose to go to other schools because they don't like the local school, they go to another one. So we can't rule out that scenario, and that might be what the Education Authority had in mind. It might not be, but they are confident that by collecting the money from other developments, schooling needs of all children can be met.
Thank you. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on that point that my colleague raised, it is about confidence, isn't it? And I think the issue is that several of us on the planning committee don't have the confidence that we are receiving accurate information from the LEA, from the local education authority, about whether this primary school can accommodate the extra projected 50 children, whether they're going to have a safe access to the school. So that these are all material things that we need to be thinking about. And indeed, if we went to a planning inspectorate, hopefully they would drill down to ascertain truth of the situation. At the end of the day, we have to make judgments on behalf of our local communities, and we don't accept everything that's written on paper as being true sometimes or accurate. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Councillor Steve?
Yes, Chairman, I was just wondering if the planning officer could confirm that the Education Authority would have been working on projected numbers of future children, not the current state.
Correct. It does say.
Is there anyone else that wishes to? Yeah, Councillor Power. Sorry, just shut your hand up at the same time.
This is a really quick point. Going on with you're saying that if it can't accommodate, that more 50 students, that you'll be sending them out to go to different schools that time of the morning. Then obviously they're going to have transport issues. The parents are going to have to take them there. The roads are just going to get incredibly more busy that time of the morning. So I think it's just a bit of a contradiction right there. But that's my only.
I'm not sure if this is going to help you, but I sat in a children's scrutiny meeting some time ago, and they looked at birth rate and school rates and everything else. So I think we've got to be really careful not looking at the number of students in a school now. They look at the projected figures in the years to come, and I was quite shocked at how the dips and troughs went on how they do that. It was a very technical paper on in what year how many students will be at which school. So I think we need to not get caught up maybe in the now, and we're looking at in the future. Would you agree with that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. But I could also say we don't have any evidence in front of us that what the Education Authority, their assumptions and their predictions aren't correct. We've had a comment that you couldn't get a new classroom into the school, but that's not really evidence that they can't achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Trimler.
Thank you. So I wasn't going to say this, but actually just regarding the school, I think they said there were around 32 extra children that would need a school place. One classroom sounds like it would be perfect, but we do have to recognise there will be a spread of ages for that school. So there is still a risk of some classes being oversized and some being smaller, particularly the older age groups being in oversized classrooms. But that's just a point I want to make. I want to ask about this that we had left on our tables, but nobody's mentioned it. And so I have got other questions that I might ask in a minute, but what is this and who is it from, etc.?
Thank you, Councillor. So you will see, I think you have the first sheet, which is some questions and comments submitted by Mr. Elbert, and it asks 16 points of for clarity, and they've been answered by the planning officer.
I can just add that the version published online has a fuller response to point 3.
Councillor Osborne?
Yeah, I think there was.
It interferes with
Okay,
your
I think
device.
skating around the opening paragraph on this, and somebody has written, Mr. Elborn on the 16th of June, that this is the formal request for an adjournment of the hearing of the planning application scheduled for the Thursday, 17th of June, on the grounds of editorial errors and data omission that give rise to apparent bias in the report that recommends approval. This will give the Area South Planning Department the opportunity to
Chairman,
review.
can I raise a point of order?
Yeah. So you can ask it to the
The point of order is the document in front of us was not produced by a member. It's not actually part of the debate of this chamber. It is, I'm not sure why it was allowed to be left on the desk, but it is clearly an enticement for a member to propose a motion that hasn't yet been adopted or proposed. Additionally, it contains a very substantive planning argument. So it is effectively trying to have your cake and eat it and sneak an extra representation in, which isn't what the planning code expects. So I'm very surprised that we've allowed this situation to arise. Could we please have some guidance from the? I think this is probably in the legal department.
Okay, before Paula answers, I'll let Paula and Catherine have a conversation. So there was a request that came to me as chair, which Sue read out. I took some advice on that yesterday, quite late yesterday it came in, and the decision was made that the members had the information they needed in the report, and the officers were satisfied with that report, and it was for us to then decide on the details and debate that. Councillor Osborne, I'm not going to take any. Councillor Osborne, you can turn your microphone off and let me finish my sentence. Please let me finish. I will do. Thank you. I'm not going to allow any further conversation on that paper until we've got some clarification from the legal officer. So if you wish to make any other comment or debate, I'm happy for us to continue while the officers are looking at it, but I'm not prepared to take any further conversation on that paper at that point. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. All I was going to say was, why was this not?
I just said we are not taking anything on that paper, and you've literally done the opposite. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on anything other than that paper for a minute? Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. Just trying to sort of pull things together. Obviously, the planning officer has made it the case for this to be allowed, and it comes down in the end. I think I'd be right in saying, planning officer, that it's about tilted balance. But we do need to remember that that is not something that is set in stone. I think it's already been mentioned by one of the speakers that recently there was judicial review at the Court of Appeal, where Justice Holgate ruled that it was a legitimate objection. This was in Norton St Philip in Somerset, to oppose the development of a particular site, even if there wasn't the 5-year land supply. So as councillors, we do have the right, to note the tilted balance argument, but we can decide that it's not going to be applicable in this case or another case. I think we all need to remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just clarify that the paragraph 11D in the tilted balance is always applicable when you don't have a 5-year supply. The point you're making, what I understand, is it is a matter that can be considered in that balance, just to be clear. It doesn't negate, in this scenario, the existence of the tilted balance.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other further points? Councillor Kendall?
The report's quite long to read through. You mentioned doctors and dentists earlier. Could you just enlighten me, so I just got the answer in my head of what the sort of
So the NHS is a consultee and they've said at this time there is no requirement for developer contributions. However, the developer should factor in a contingency.
Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, to me, this is clearly overdevelopment, but because of the 5-year land supply, we can't rely on our local plan or SS2. And I think the danger here, without a material reason to turn this down, we are going to lose any appeal. We'll lose control of the conditions, potentially we'd lose some S106 contributions. So I keep coming back to this school and materiality with the school. I know that we can't object to it on overdevelopment, but to me, that is a material reason. If that 106 cannot be built out, it cannot be delivered there, then to me, that is a material reason. I would just like I know I've already asked for this once, but I'd just like to absolutely have it hammered down. The professional opinions of the officer is we have no chance of winning an appeal if we were to put it on the back of the materiality of the school. Just like to have that clarified, please.
Okay, we're just going to get that read whilst I come back to another couple of people. Councillor Patrick and then Councillor C.
Thank you very much, Chair. Whilst people have been raising comments about education, I've managed to make a bit of a study myself of all the documents we have on the system. And I just wanted to read out a paragraph, because as a former teacher myself, I understand education is vital. Let's just put it there. If we haven't got enough spaces for the kids, we're in a whole heap of trouble. The bit that I want to read out is from 2023, and it is from our own Estates and Planning Officer at Somerset Council, Louise Martin, who says the feasibility study at school has been completed. Whilst it has identified that an additional classroom could be built, it would be difficult to do so, and therefore more expensive to expand. And I think that's worth pointing out for a number of reasons. People are clearly concerned there's no space on the site. Our own council, Children's Services part of our council, said it can be expanded. And it looks from these discussions I've been reading, that our officers have managed to get more money from the developer than they would have otherwise got to account for the extra costs to expand in quite a unique site. And I think what my colleague Councillor Curley is alluding to is if this goes to appeal and we lose, we do put at risk those contributions, which might make life harder. I just think colleagues need to bear that in mind as we deliberate. Thank you.
Councillor C.
Councillor Patrick's made my point perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Curley.
I didn't get clarification to my question.
We're just going back to just checking there wasn't a new one. Is there anything else new anyone would like to bring in before I bring Tom back? Councillor C.
Yes, sorry to ask for the second part of the same, Cherry, but the debate around expanding the school was around an assertion made by an objector. It wasn't actually in the officer's report. What we have got in the office is the point that there is a feasible expansion, that the kids can be accommodated, and that the full cost of doing so that can be laid at the door of the developer is being done so, and that the developer has agreed to pay that cost. So I think that feeds your answer quite nicely.
Thank you.
Still looking for the detailed education response, but I think the discussion we've just had there, I think it's quite clear to say, as I mentioned earlier, it's been mentioned that it wasn't possible to get an additional classroom on the school. Well, that might be true, it might not be true, but we don't know. That's what the Education Authority was actually proposing. The Education Authority, Somerset Council, is saying that their objectives can be achieved, and I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that that isn't the case.
Okay, I'm going to let this go once more, and then I think we need to accept the fact that we've had questioned and answered.
So it's your judgment as an officer that we could not win an appeal on the basis of that?
No, and also you need to factor in it would be one element within the planning balance. We're back to the, I don't like labouring the point, but we know that, I don't need to repeat that, 5-year supply, etc. The planning balance, it might be considered as a minor negative, but I don't think it changes the balance.
Councillor Page.
just to follow up on that, I do know Kenton Mandeville very well. I know the school site very well. I have walked around it, and all I could say to colleagues is I can't see physically that there's a space on that site to put in an extra classroom, potentially for 52 children. So I just share that, you know, I know that site very, very well. I can't see the space there.
Thank you. I think we have to accept the fact that an objective said it can happen. A planning officer said they've got advice from the education authority, said it can. Councillor Patrick has found a report from the education authority that says it definitely can. Whilst it might not be easy, it can be achieved. So I think that particular point has been rigorously questioned and thoroughly answered. So I'm happy to move on from that specific point. Councillor Trimner.
Thank you, Chair. So it's quite clear from this report that there are extensive conflicts in this application and policy SS2. It's made even more clear by the extensive effort that's been made in this report to rebuff every single element of SS2 that we might bring up, such as the expansion by almost 20% of this village. I want to understand why it is that policy SS2 is something that's thrown out, that we cannot reject this. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
That's all it is.
So I want to know, are there any grounds, or is this report basically saying you may have found some things that conflict with policy SS2, but you can't use that? Because that's what I'm reading from this. That policy, I think EQ5 was another one they've been debunked for us ahead of us actually asking or being able to probe. And I just want to understand where we stand with that.
So in terms of SS2 itself, it has several criteria, and the report goes into how the application would comply or not comply. With each criterion. There may be some conflict with one criterion, but it might not be sufficient to form the grounds for a refusal of the whole scheme, because we have to look at the scheme in the round. We have to look at all of the adverse impacts, all of the positives, and take an assessment, a balanced judgment at the end. And there are substantial benefits, significant benefits. There are some adverse impacts. The tilted balance does change the weight applied to some of the policies in the local plan. So policies that might be considered to limit housing would carry less weight because of the lack of the 5-year housing land supply. So they should still be assessed. They shouldn't be ignored, but they carry less weight. So in this case, there is not one conflict with SS2. There are some conflicts to part of SS2.
Thank you. I'm just going to Councillor Patrick, and then I'll come back.
Oh, sorry, Chair, disappoint you, but the officer has said what I wanted to say.
Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether it's appropriate at this point in the debate, but maybe to try to pull things together, maybe put a proposal forward.
If you're happy to just wait for 1 second while I come back to Councillor Trimmer, then I'll come straight back to you for that proposal. Councillor Trimmer.
Thank you, Chair. It does concern me that we're going from what is a rural settlement to the type of expansion in a rural centre for the sake of meeting our figures. I don't understand how we are not getting more frequent reports about our land supply, our 5-year land supply, because that's come as a surprise, it would appear to you who sits on the planning committee as much as it does to me. The reduction seems quite rapid, and so I think that we need to be made far more aware of that on a far more regular basis. My concern is that we're going to pass this okay, because that's how it seems. That this is going to be passed on things that can be changed at the reserved matters stage. But even if we put things in, to be conditioned, that those can be changed once it comes forward, could take time before that comes forward. I'm assuming, and I don't even know, that this is an agent-led approach, which will then be sold to the applicant who actually wants to build, because we haven't heard from anybody who wants to actually build on this. And so my concern is that we end up in a situation where this comes back within the next year or so, completely changed again, but the outline planning permission means that anything goes. I really think we need to firm that up, please.
I'm going to go to Catherine to answer that briefly, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Page to sum up.
So in terms of the change to the 5-year housing land supply, the government updated the NPPF in December, and they changed the calculations or the methodology, and that's why we went down from 3.44 years to 2.11 years. In terms of the outline application, if, for example, this application were approved today, and then there was another scheme submitted, another outline scheme further down the line, then that would be assessed against the planning policy that's current at that time. So that's we can't look at that. And in terms of what would be tied into this scheme, the design intent that's set out in the illustrative master plan, such as the amount of green infrastructure and the landscape-led design, that sort of thing, the circular walks, the connectivity, the placemaking, all of that would be tied down to any reserved matters applications through conditions here.
Thank you. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably a time to pull this debate together. We've had a lot of interesting points from members. We've had detailed responses from the planning officer and other people. Somebody earlier said that the villages of Somerset are the jewels in the crown, and I think Kenton Mandeville is one of those jewels. I feel that this is an overdevelopment of a rural site, that it's not commensurate with the scale and character of this particular settlement. So that's in contrary to SS2 and I think EQ2. We've also heard the pressures on the primary school, which I don't think have been fully answered, and that's contrary to SS6 in the local plan. And finally, in terms of democracy, which is what all of us are supposed to be supporting, there have been nearly 600 objections to this. Virtually everybody in the village has objected. So it has no local support, and that's something we do need to acknowledge. So I'd like to move that we vote to turn down this application, to refuse it. Thank you.
Thank you. So your proposal is against those policies along with the public support?
Yes, what I've just voted, yes.
Councillor Curley. No. Councillor Osborne.
I'm happy to support Councillor Page in refusing this application, and I also think there are grounds on disrespect of local distinctiveness and landscape character. However much you dress it up, you cannot get away from the fact that you are putting 100 houses in a very small rural settlement, which is characterised by open country.
Thank you. Councillor Page, are you happy to take those additional points as part of your recommendation?
Yes, I welcome them. Thank you.
If you want
Councillor Osborne. Councillor Steve.
Chairman, will there be a debate on this proposal to reject before a vote? Because I think there are several things in there I couldn't support because I think the facts are against them, and it has become a bit of a Christmas tree of.
We don't normally debate a proposal. If you don't accept the proposal, you could offer an amendment, or you can vote against the proposal. But we don't normally debate a proposal.
I'm reasonably content with your guidance, Chair.
Okay, so we have a proposal and a valid second on the table for refusal. Are you happy, Seth, that you've got the reasons for that?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Can you just recap just the policy points that you're basing on?
Yes, that this committee should refuse this application due to the fact that it's contrary to policy SS2 and EQ2 in terms of the impact on the scale and character of the settlement of Kent and Mandeville and the landscape and the local objections to this development.
Thank you. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of that proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 against.
Okay, so that proposal fails. I'm now looking for an alternative proposal. Councillor Steve.
Chairman, can I move the officer's recommendation? Chairman, can I move the officer's recommendation?
Thank you very much, Councillor Steve. Councillor Kendall. Okay, so we have a proposal to approve the application as in line with the report in front of you, which has been duly seconded. Can I have a show of hands for those in favour of that proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Those against?
That will be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Any abstentions? Okay, so that proposal is carried and the application is approved as per the recommendation. Thank you very much, members. So we move on to the second application. Literally 2 or 3 minutes. It's now 4 o'clock, so I'd like to be back at 4, please. Thomas, bringing your coffee. Just give Tom a minute. Okay. Thank you very much, Tom.
That's not my job.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 6. This is application 244/01466 former county infant school at Terrace, Somerton. I will hand you over to Tom, who's going to do the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Just working out how to make the screen bigger.
Looks fine like that.
Are we okay with that?
Yeah. Do you need your speaker
I need to
notes?
make it move. No, I'm okay.
Just use your arrows. No?
Do it that way.
Yeah. Oh, you might have to use these arrows here then.
I'll just, okay. So a full application for 16 homes on the former school site at Somerton. 4 terraces of 3 houses, 1 block of 4 flats. I'll show you the layout shortly. So the recommendation is for planning permission to be granted, subject to Section 106 and conditions, which are in the report, and I will touch on in my presentation. Obviously, you can ask further questions after I finish the presentation. There's a peculiarity with the Section 106 with a cascade a clause in it, which I hope if you read the report, it's explained there, but I will explain it again. I think that's probably the key to the decision on this application, but obviously there are all the other matters that we need to consider. The application is coming to committee because Somerset Council is the landowner. There's Somerton up there in the northwest of our area, and the site is in the north of Somerton. I understand there's a council facility there. I think it houses vehicles now, and then this site is, if I say derelict, it makes it sound a mess, but it's in reasonable condition, but it's a brownfield site. So what I wanted to focus on in the presentation, there's obviously more detail in the report, but look at the principle of development, landscape and character, layout and design, affordable housing, clarify on biodiversity and phosphate mitigation, and then get into, I'll put viability there, but it's viability in the section 106. In terms of principal development, it is a brownfield site in Somerton. So I think its sustainability credentials are very high. The NPPF tells us to use brownfield sites first. And here is a good example with an excellent proposal for 16 affordable houses. I'll get into the detail of that later. I don't think that plan's particularly helpful there, is it? Because you can't see the distances. Those arrows point to where various facilities are available to be walked to. We can look at that in more detail, but I'm sure no one doubts the sustainability credentials of this site. Statutory consultees, it's all in the report. We have no objections. There are 2 requests for Section 106 money. I'll come to that in a moment. We have representations. There are 2 representations that say we support it in principle, but we've got these issues, and I've captured the issues here. People talking about we don't need the housing. There'll be impact on infrastructure. You can see the list there. It's all in the report. I won't go into the detail of those, but we will pick up on residential amenity, trees and parking, noting that the parish council was supportive, other than they were concerned that there might not be enough parking on site. In terms of landscape and character, that's approaching the site from the southeast. There's 2 large trees. I'll show you a tree plan in a moment. Those 2 trees are retained, but other trees are to be removed and replaced. You can see just in that little bit of the white building there, it's the old school building. And that's looking at it from the north, looking in. Again, you can see some mature trees on the site. Some will be lost, but that's all we considered. We've had advice from our ecologists, and we've achieved biodiversity net gain and some new trees. This is the layout. So you have in the northwest, and then next to it on the east, and then in the eastbound, we've got 4 terraces of 3 properties. And I'll show you an elevation plan view in a moment. And then that southwest is 4 apartments. This shows a plan where some of those trees are retained. You can see the cluster of trees on the south will be retained, and there's other trees that will be removed, and then the greens there are new trees be planted. Comments were made that other designs could have the green space on the edge. Well, other designs are possible, but this is a nice design that gives a nice central area for those living in the area to enjoy that amenity. I'll come back to the amenity. I think another drawing is perhaps better for checking the amenity with existing properties. But you can see there that the site has a access road to the north and the east, which is separates it from existing dwellings. Indeed, there it is. So it hasn't come out particularly clearly. I'll come back to the layout in a second. So there's indicative floor plans there. Our housing colleagues are happy that the building sizes meet standards. They are designed as, they're all, every property is affordable housing. I'll come back to that point in a moment. So they've been designed to be an affordable housing product. That's an idea of, well, these plans will all be conditioned. That's just an elevation to give you an idea of the palette. That's at the rear and the side, and that's just a street scene. Again, you can't really see the detail on there. Apologies. That just demonstrates that we have had a detailed plan for dealing with wastewater, surface water, and indeed that plan there shows the sustainable drainage system measures on site. Nutrient neutrality is achieved by those measures there. Biodiversity net gain can be secured through a condition. I said I was going to look at the neighbouring amenity. So I'll just go back to get the plan which shows the layout best. I think unfortunately there we go. So as you can see, so where those properties on the north side, that'll be their fronts, they're looking out onto a road. So the properties on the other side of the road, there's one that's side on, and then that grey block right at the kind of the top north of that plan is set back, and you've got an intervening road, and then the same on the east side. So the distances between properties is respected, and there is, you'll see on the northwest corner, it's a side on relationship there with an existing property to the west. So in terms of amenity and overlooking, etc., the design meets it is appropriate and is acceptable in that respect. Reasonably quickly through all that, so I'm quite happy that we have a good proposal before us, but obviously you can ask more questions. I just wanted to touch on viability in the section 106, and I had written it down on the laptop, and I will go back to my notes if you start looking positive with this cascade section 106 scenario. So the application is proposed as 100% affordable housing social rent, which I'm sure we'll think is brilliant, but it relies on a grant from Homes England. So we're in that scenario where if it's relying on a grant, we can't approve it as 100% affordable housing. So we need to look at a scheme that's 35% affordable housing plus the Section 106 contributions. So that can be achieved, and I'll come back to that. But the Section 106, and there is a legal agreement between the applicant and the landowner, which is the council, that the site will be delivered as affordable housing, 16 affordable houses. But in order to ensure policy compliance as a committee, what I'm advising you is that in the Section 106, the Section 106 will say 16 affordable houses. But if any of those properties, if the grant from Homes England isn't available, we don't doubt it, but it might not be, we can't be sure. If it isn't, for any property that's sold as an open market house, a commensurate amount of money will be paid towards the Section 106 contributions that have been requested. Let's go back to that at the moment. So the proposal is 100% affordable housing and a viability assessment that has been reviewed demonstrates that at 100% affordable housing, they can't pay any of the Section 106 money. I've got it on my notes here, what the amounts are. So, and it's in the report. I think the monies were 100 and something thousand for affordable housing and 39,000 for open space. So the viability assessment, which we've had reviewed and we agree with, and I've spoken to education and open space, and the applicant has said, well, although it's not viable because you're allowed to have I think 12-15% profit, we've still got enough money to give 30,000 pounds to those two contributions, education and open space. So the 106 starting point would be 100% affordable housing plus 30,000 pounds as a contribution, about 15% of the contributions that were requested for education and open space. If any of those, if the grant isn't available and any of those properties less than 16 don't become as open market housing, that money will then top up the amount to the worst case scenario, if you can call it that, would be 35% affordable housing plus all the Section 106 money paid. So that is in accordance with policy, and therefore we can recommend it for approval. But the objective would be to get 100% affordable housing with a reduced Section 106. And because of that cascade mechanism in the 106, I feel comfortable to recommend that that the application is approved with the conditions laid out, and that the final details of the section 106, as described with that cascade, can be delegated to the head of planning in consultation with the chair and vice chair. Any questions? I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try and keep this in the order we're on. I'm going to go call, as there are no public speakers, there's no one which is against or for. We do have Mr. Norris, who's the agent, who I'm going to show he's well versed coming in and joining us in the chamber here. So I'm going to let him do his 3 minutes, and then I'm going to let us go into questions, because I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, mostly on viability. But I think if we stick to order and let Dave speak first. Thank you.
Get that, Anthony members. Just a few bullet points to run through. I think Thomas has explained it really well. What appears to be quite complicated with the 106, but it's not, because 100% housing will be delivered here. If anything does turn back to open market housing, the appropriate contribution will be paid back to the authority, so nobody loses. So 16 affordable homes, brownfield site, centre of Somerton, support of the town council, and only 2 letters from neighbours, both of whom have just said they don't really mind it. So it's a really kind of acceptable scheme. The application is only before the committee because it's a county site or a Somerset site, and of course the receipt will go back to the council, although that's not a material planning consideration here. I think whilst we're really pleased to get the support of the officer on this, I think it's fair to say that we've been frustrated with the 100% affordable housing scheme that's taken almost a year to get to this point, when there's no objection, but full town council support. And Thomas, for that, he's taken over recently, so it's not at all aimed at him. I think our biggest fear now is if members are minded to support this scheme, is that it will disappear into the black hole of the 106s. We submitted a draft 5 months ago to the council for consideration, asking them to look at it and provide comments to us, with a view to the land exchange taking place pretty much immediately after this committee. We've received nothing back in the 5 months about that thing. We've offered to pay costs, we've offered to do anything, but we received nothing back. And my fear is that it's going to disappear again, and this really could put this scheme in jeopardy. So what I would perhaps slightly cheekily, I would ask if members could resolve, if the 106 isn't concluded within 4 weeks, it comes back to committee for officers to explain why. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, and also on a kind of more, on a wider note about affordable housing, not specific to this, just to say that we at Boom Brown do lots of work for Avery and Stonewater. We're submitting lots of pre-application inquiries for 100% affordable housing schemes, but we're not getting responses for months and months. And I know you're all very aware of the housing crisis. There are schemes out there that want to be delivered. The planning service really is holding this up at the moment. We really want to work with you to stop this from happening and see these homes delivered.
Thank you, Dave. I'm not up for bringing it back to committee next month if you haven't had a 106 agreement, because if I do that for you, I'm going to have to do it for everyone, and then our meetings will double in time on that. What I am prepared to do is, if you want to email me as chair in a month's time, if you haven't had anything, then I'm more than happy to try and chase that, find out where it is. As with any of the other affordable housing sites, if you want to get an update, by all means, pop me an email, and I can always hassle Tom and the team find out. I do think that they're under some considerable strain, especially the legal team at the moment. So whilst I understand what's going on, I think there are some issues there which we're doing our best to resolve. But I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, thank you. On to the influx of questions for Tom on viability, I guess. Councillor Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm aware that the housing which is on the opposite side of the road for 100 yards or so beyond the entrance is fairly cohesive. It's all very much one builder, one finish, all the way up there. Can you just explain a little more detail about the finishes that will actually face the street and explain what consideration has been made to match up and provide an appropriate street scene?
Yes, thank you, Councillor C. And I just confess I have picked up this application later in the process, wasn't involved with the design process, but I'm looking at the scheme there, and I was on site this morning. There's a kind of I'm not a builder, so I don't know whether I've got the right term, but there's a kind of stone facade on a lot of the properties around it. This is very similar colour, and a slate coloured roof. So it's similar in style, the windows are similar in size, etc. It certainly matches up. But that's my observation from the drawings I've looked at and being on site.
Thank you, Councillor Fairley.
Yeah, I've got a question, but if I just come in on that, I think there's something specific about this site where I don't think it actually needs to match in the way that others do. Its history was there was a milk factory there, and in the Second World War it was bombed. We actually have some Commonwealth War gravestones from this. It was quite an amazing story. Now, I think, although it's fine that it's redeveloped, I think it's quite nice that it's kept its own separate identity, so people can look at it and know that's not part of the terrace, that something happened there that was a little bit different. So I hear the argument you say it should look the same, but I don't think in this particular that applies really.
Okay, Councillor Osborne. Oh, sorry, go back to your.
Apologies. So yeah, my question was, in terms of the school street furniture, is that all going to be removed? I noticed there is a lay-by on the north that was for deliveries. That is not going to be needed anymore. Is that going to be returned back to Ordinary Road? The zigzags out the front, I presume, will be removed along with the fence. But I didn't see anything. It might be in there and I've missed it, but I didn't see anything on conditions on that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, the school paraphernalia would be removed. Looking at that lay-by, there was I parked there this morning. It was a motorbike park there, so I'm sure the residents probably in the evening there's probably cars parked there. But that's at the front of someone's house. They've got parking inside, haven't they? So yeah, the paraphernalia will be generally removed. But I think that lay-by probably stays.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question about the viability about the Homes England funding. Do you actually have a date when Homes England are likely to inform you whether you have that funding or not? And is it either or is it sort of graduated that you may get all of it, you might get a bit of it, or you might get none of it at all?
My understanding is a conversation between the developer and Home England is advanced, and I'm thinking 1.2 million.
Sorry, I could respond
if I've seen a figure. I maybe 1.2 million from the previous thing. It might be 1.6, but it's advanced. There have clearly been detailed conversations, and I think it's fairly secure. But the only thing is we can't be absolutely secure. And we don't know, but you've just heard from the agent. They're going to be super keen to. They'll probably be on the phone to them tomorrow morning, trying to get it resolved, and we'll work to support that.
And as I think this is going to be quite a key piece of information, our members happy that we invite Dave back up to give a bit more clarity on that if needed, because I think a lot of the questions could be saved by Dave just answering it. I'm more than happy for you to stay there if you want to.
Yes.
They need to
Yeah, I'm not an expert in development finance, but I know that the people we work with, the council's delivery partners such as Avery and Stonewater, have to have a really good relationship with Homes England, because they're the ones who draw down the grant to actually provide the affordable homes. We don't build our own homes in Somerset. So therefore, they're the people who have a good relationship with Homes England, put in their programme of projects coming forward, get like a tacit approval from the Homes England, they will support it, put in the planning application, then draw down the money. One of the problems I alluded to earlier was the delays getting a planning consent mean that funding becomes vulnerable.
That was the other point I was going to make. As far as I'm aware, Homes England funding does seem to come with deadlines attached, and I would hate to lose that funding because your application disappeared into the black hole of 106s. And it is a problem, and we do need to solve it because there's an awful lot of applications caught up in this. We're passing a lot of development to this committee on a regular basis, and it's not making a blind bit of difference to the housing.
Councillor Osborne, can we stick to this application?
And I'm sticking to this application because if you are successful in achieving that funding, then I think it really does need to be expedited. As any application that's got funding attached to this tight deadline, we do need to get those through and dealt with. And I'd like assurance that we will actually get this done.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. I think you heard that earlier. Dave will be in contact with me if there are any problems, and I will also be speaking to Tom to make sure that we can try and get these applications, especially that linked funding, across the line. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, 16 affordable homes. There is a long list of people on the home finders list. Is it possible to have some of the houses reserved maybe for people who live in Somerton or have connections with Somerton? Is that an option?
I think, Tom, did we do something like this before? The word donuts coming back to me.
My experience has been that it tends to work that way, the people in need locally, and then that will be until you get to, I worked in South Hams for a while, and it was when the donut got to Birmingham, councillors started inappropriately suggesting it wasn't a good idea. But
Princeton's there.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's one big donut. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you. I was just going to say that in the report it does say that people with a local connection will be given priority. So it's a point very well made.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any further questions at this point? If not, I'll move us into debate. Who would like to go first?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to point out, unlike most other developments that go on, we're looking at an empty piece of land with no occupation, and we're looking at the increased use. Slightly different here in that the school is actually occupied by people living in there. Obviously not 16 households worth, but there are people there, there's parking there already. So the increase won't be quite as significant as if it was an empty site. I am quite happy to propose this, Chair. I'm happy to wait to hear the debate as well.
Okay, before I come back to you for the proposal, give you the first option, but I'm going to go first to Councillor Page and Councillor Steve.
Thank you, Chair. As the co-member of the Somerton division, I think this has a lot of positives to it in terms of creating 16 affordable homes, using a brownfield site, central location, talk about primary schools, quite good access to the new primary school. So to me, this is a win-win-win. And at a future point, I'm very happy to second this proposal. That's my full support.
Thank you. Councillor Steve.
I was going to offer the second, but
Popular applications. Does anyone else wish to add anything at this point? If not, I'm happy to go back to Councillor Kerr. Oh, yep.
I want to say, I only seen like yesterday that when looking at the new school that we opened, maybe that was many years ago, but it just seems, I understand why it's here.
Thank you, Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to recommend we go with the officer's proposal on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Page.
And I'm happy to second the proposal.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, can I have a show of hands for all of those in favour?
1, 2, 3.
That is unanimous.
7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you very much.
12 unanimous. Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to agenda item 6. Agenda item 7, it will be for the planning. What's the paper? There you go. Thank you. Just the appeal decisions, which have been noting in the report. Members happy to note the appeals in the report. Councillor Steve.
Chairman, I think we should minute it since we noted and note that a number of the applications are simply timed out. The authority got cost awards against us for the timeouts appeals, and I think it really does show where we are in terms of problems with the planning application pipeline at the moment. I think the executive should be given after this.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Steve. I'm sure you will be taking that to the executive at the Councillor Kelly there. Any other comments on the appeals? If not, we're happy to note. Sorry, Tom.
It's comments on the appeals, but also responding to that. Thank you, councillor. So the first one was what is and isn't isolated development. We didn't get costs. The inspector saying it was reasonable, but that got allowed. So be aware there's a shift in what people are saying is and isn't isolated development. We could debate that for a long time, but I think we've discussed that at other committees. The other one was character of listed building. They thought our case was reasonable and didn't award costs. But the last one I think you're referring to, it was a and then the other one was a non-determination. Costs were allowed. It just shows how important it is that we have resource to get applications dealt with, and we have got some new senior planning officers coming into South area, picking up applications, which is really good news.
Excellent, thank you very much. Members are happy to note. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for coming along. I will be having a chat with Steph in a minute. We'll have a chat about microphones and IT, and we will see if we can try harder for next time. Thank you very much.
Everyone.